After my wife's funeral, my children seized all of my assets and kicked me out of the house. I had to use my last $200 to buy an abandoned house at a county auction. But, while renovating the old barn out back, I discovered a secret cellar beneath the floorboards. Inside, there was a massive hoard of gold and a notebook. When I opened it all, the pages had been torn out except for one single remaining page. Thank you for joining me today. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me. Are you listening in the morning or late at night? Your presence here means something. Just a note. Some details in this story have been adjusted for clarity and reflection, but the message at its core is what truly matters. I stood beside my wife's casket holding a small wooden toolbox because I didn't know where else to put my hands. The church was small, one of those century-old structures in Hilldale, Tennessee, where the pews still smell like lemon oil and hymnal pages. 58 years old, sawdust still under my fingernails from a custom cabinet order I'd never finished. And I couldn't stop thinking about how Nora's favorite dress was the blue one, not this cream-colored thing the funeral director had chosen. Nora Vance had been 56 when she died that April morning. 34 years of marriage, gone between one breath and the next while I was measuring oak boards in the workshop. Julian arrived late as usual. My son was 30 now, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. Real estate deals he'd told me over Christmas. Opportunities. The fabric pulled tight across his shoulders when he moved, and I noticed the way his jaw clenched when he saw me standing there with the toolbox, the one I'd built when he was 7, when he still asked questions about wood grain and dovetailed joints. Dad? His hand on my shoulder felt formal. We'll get through this. Family takes care of family. I nodded because words seemed like too much work. Chloe came next, 24 with her mother's dark eyes and something else I couldn't quite name. She wore black well the way Nora always had. Her fingers touched the toolbox, traced the corner joint I'd spent 2 days getting perfect back in 1995. Let me hold it for you, Dad. She said, her voice soft and sweet as summer rain. You shouldn't have to carry anything today. I handed it to her. Her hands trembled when she took it, just slightly barely visible unless you knew what to look for. I thought it was grief. God help me, I thought my daughter was crying for her mother. The service blurred. Pastor Morgan said words about eternal rest and God's plan. Someone sang Amazing Grace, off-key. I stared at Nora's casket and tried to remember the last thing I'd said to her. Something about dinner. Something meaningless. 3 days later, I sat in Raymond Blackwell's office trying to understand why my entire life fit into 12 pages of legal documentation. Raymond was 50, maybe 52, with silver at his temples and the smooth confidence of a man who'd read 1,000 wills. The office smelled like leather and old paper. Julian sat across from me, still wearing expensive clothes. Chloe had her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still. The property at 414 Dunmore Farm Road. Raymond said, his finger following lines of text I couldn't quite focus on. Outstanding tax debts, contaminated land from the old septic failure. No commercial value, I'm afraid. I blinked. The farm where Nora grew up, where we'd planned to retire. The lumber mill and townhouse in Clarksville go to the children Julian and Chloe joint ownership. Raymond looked up. The farm, however, carries significant liability. Mrs. Vance documented the contamination and tax issues quite thoroughly. I'll sign the waiver now, Julian said, pulling a pen from his jacket before Raymond even slid the paper across. No need to burden the family with that liability. Between grief and paperwork, there's a kind of numbness that protects you until it doesn't. I watched my son sign away his inheritance rights to Nora's family farm in under 30 seconds. His signature was bold, confident, final. Mr. Vance, Raymond turned to me. The estate needs your acknowledgement of the asset distribution. I took the document. The text swam a little. Lumber mill valued at $340,000. Townhouse at $180,000. Farm at Dunmore Road. $0 estimated value, $47,000 in outstanding county liens. Nora's signature sat at the bottom of page 6. Her careful loops. The slight backward slant she'd had since high school when she'd taught herself cursive from a library book. I'd seen that signature on birthday cards, mortgage papers, Christmas lists for 34 years. When did she sign this? I heard myself ask. Mrs. Vance executed the will 2 years ago, Raymond said. March 2016. My office notarized it. Everything is quite in order. Julian shifted in his chair, just slightly. Dad, we should let Mr. Blackwell get to his other appointments, Chloe said gently. I signed where Raymond pointed. My hand moved automatically. Arthur Vance in black ink that looked nothing like Nora's elegant script. We stood. Julian shook Raymond's hand. Chloe touched my elbow, steering me toward the door like I was fragile glass. In the parking lot, spring sunlight hurt my eyes. Julian was already in his car engine running. Chloe gave me a hug that smelled like Nora's perfume. She must have taken it from the house. "Take care of yourself, Dad," she whispered. Then they were gone, and I was standing beside my truck with 12 pages of paperwork that said I'd lost a wife and gained a worthless farm in the same week. How does a man sign away his entire life in under 5 minutes? I sat in the truck cab and looked at the will again. Page 6, Nora's signature. The handwriting was right. The loops, the slant, the way she always made the V in Vance too large. All of it is perfect. But my wife never signed her name to anything without telling me first. Not a mortgage, not a credit card application, not a permission slip for school field trips. In 34 years, Nora had never made a legal decision without sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and talking through every detail until we both understood. I spent 2 weeks thinking about that signature, 2 weeks trying to understand why Nora would execute a will without telling me. Then Julian arrived at my door with the answer I hadn't wanted to find. 2 weeks after I buried my wife, my son took my house. "Dad, this won't take long." Julian didn't wait for an invitation before stepping into the entryway. "The property transfer is complete. The townhouse and woodworking shop are legally mine now. You have 48 hours to vacate." The words took a moment to land. I stood there holding a coffee mug that said, "World's Best Dad," a Father's Day gift from Chloe when she was 9. 48 hours, I repeated. "I've arranged for a moving company if you need help." He set the folder on the entry table unopened. "It's just business, Dad. You'll understand eventually." He left. The whole conversation took maybe 3 minutes. I packed what fit in my truck clothes, Nora's photo albums, the toolbox Chloe had returned the day after the funeral. When I lifted it into the truck bed, the weight felt wrong, too heavy for the hammer and measuring tape I kept inside. In the garage with the truck half loaded, I opened it. The tools were there, but underneath the tray in the space where I had built a false bottom 20 years ago, something crinkled. I pulled up the panel. Cash. $10 bills and 20s folded into a manila envelope. I counted it twice, $200 exactly. An emergency fund I'd been adding to for years, $5 here, $10 there, whenever I had cash work that Nora didn't know about. Money for if everything went wrong. Everything had gone wrong. There's a particular emptiness to walking out of your own front door for the last time. It doesn't feel like leaving. It feels like being erased. I locked the door and left the key on the kitchen counter like Julian's lawyer had requested. 22 years. 400 square feet of sawdust memories where I'd built cabinets for 3 governors and a dining table that went to the State Museum. Gone. 4 days later, I sat in the Williamson County auction hall with a number card in my hand and $200 in my pocket. The room smelled like old carpet and desperation. 70, maybe 80 people scattered across folding chairs. Harold Pierce, the county auctioneer for 20 years, announced properties with the mechanical rhythm of a man who'd sold everything from estates to abandoned cars. Next item, 414 Dunmore Farm Road. Harold barely looked up from his clipboard. 52 acres residential structure, well and septic. County tax line $47,000. Environmental remediation required for septic contamination. No recent survey available. Property sold as is. A photograph flashed on the screen behind him. A white farmhouse nearly hidden by overgrown trees. Nora's family farm. Minimum bid is $200. Harold's gavel hung ready. "Do I have 200 eBay?" No one moved. I looked around. Not a single hand raised. The woman next to me was reading the next lot listing. The man in front shifted in his seat, waiting for Harold to move on. "Minimum bid stands at $200, Harold repeated. "This is a county seizure for unpaid liens. Property will be reoffered next quarter if no bid is received." My hand went up. Harold's eyes found me. "Bidder 73 for $200. Do I have 250? Silence. Going once, twice. The gavel fell. Sold to bidder 73 for $200. I signed papers in a windowless room that smelled like toner and mildew. A clerk who looked 16 processed my cash and handed me a temporary deed. I walked out owning 52 acres of contaminated land no one else wanted. What makes a man bid his last dollar on a piece of land everyone else knows is worthless. The drive to Dunmore Road took 40 minutes. I followed the county highway through farmland, just starting to green up, past the Baptist church, where Nora and I got married, past the feed store that had closed in the 90s. The road to the farm was gravel 2 ruts with grass growing between them. I saw the house from a quarter-mile away. White paint peeling in long strips, porch sagging on the north end where the support post had rotted. Weeds shoulder-high against the foundation purple thistle, and wild roses tangled together. The driveway was dirt barely visible under winter-killed grass. I parked and sat in the truck cab engine ticking as it cooled. 30 years ago, when Nora first brought me here, the house had been white with blue shutters. Her father had kept honeybees in the back field. The porch had rocking chairs where her mother sat, shelling peas on summer evenings. Now it stood abandoned, alone. The afternoon sun caught the windows at an angle that made them look like eyes. I got out. My boots crunched on gravel. A cardinal called from somewhere in the overgrown hedge. The air smelled like dirt and new leaves and something else old wood, the particular scent of a house that's been waiting. The front steps creaked but held my weight. The door was locked, but the key the county clerk gave me turned smoothly like someone had oiled it recently. Inside, dust coated everything, but nothing was broken. No vandalism, no stripped copper, no graffiti. Just a house that had been empty and was now full of questions. And I didn't know yet what Nora had sent me here to find, but I knew my wife well enough to know she wouldn't do this without a reason. The reason took 3 weeks to find. 3 weeks of living like a squatter in what used to be Nora's childhood home, working dawn to dusk, trying to understand what she'd meant for me to discover. I knocked on the barn floor 37 times before I understood what the farm was hiding. The first week I slept on a second-hand mattress I'd picked up from a church donation center in Hilldale. No electricity yet. The power company wanted a deposit I didn't have. No running water beyond what the hand pump in the yard could give me. I ate from cans heated over a camp stove and washed in cold water that smelled like iron and limestone. The work was methodical, precise, the only thing keeping grief at a manageable distance. I started with the porch railing rotted through in 3 places dangerous enough to kill someone who leaned on it wrong. Replaced the boards with pressure-treated pine from the lumber yard, the last purchase on a credit card Julian hadn't found yet. The south window frames came next. Sills soft with water-damaged glass rattling loose in frames that hadn't been painted in 20 years. Every day dawn to dusk. Measure cut, fit nail. The rhythm I'd known for 30 years. The basement took 4 days to clear. Decades of debris, broken furniture, boxes of newspapers, from the 80s Christmas decorations that smelled like mildew and mothballs. I carried it all out to a burn pile in the back field, working until my shoulders ached and my hands couldn't grip the hammer anymore. At night, I sat on the porch steps and talked to Nora like she could hear me. "What am I doing here?" I asked the empty field. "What did you want me to find?" The silence never answered. Grief is a kind of weight you carry differently depending on whether you're moving or standing still. I learned to keep moving. Week 3, I turned my attention to the barn. It was old, probably 80 years, maybe older. Timber frame construction hand-hewn beams that some craftsman had shaped with an adze before I was born. The roof needed patching. The doors hung crooked on hinges that had rusted through. But the bones were solid. I worked from the outside in, replaced the broken boards on the north wall, rehung the doors with new hardware, cleared the swallow nests from the rafters and the rat droppings from the corners. Then I started on the floor. 30 years of carpentry taught me to test surfaces before I trust them. You knock knuckles against wood heel of your hand against concrete and listen to what comes back. Hollow means rot or void. Solid means structure. Dense means foundation. The barn floor was poured concrete old enough that the surface had worn smooth in the traffic patterns. An ancient plow sat against the east wall, the kind farmers pulled behind mules before tractors existed. I moved it first, dragging the iron frame across the floor with a sound like a saw blade on bone. Then I started knocking. Left side of the barn hollow underneath. Normal for a structure this old crawl space for drainage, maybe an old root cellar. Right side, same hollow sound. Expected. But the middle section directly beneath where the plow had been sitting sounded wrong. I knocked again. Not hollow, dense, deliberately dense. I got down on my knees and ran my hands across the concrete. The surface looked the same as the rest, worn, stained, unremarkable. But when I knocked with my knuckles, the sound that came back was insulated, muffled, like knocking on a wall that had something behind it. I knocked 37 times, working in a grid pattern across that section of floor, 6 feet from north to south, 2 feet from east to west. Every knock came back dense. "What the hell?" I said to the empty barn. How many people walk over secrets every day without knowing the floor beneath them is lying? I got a flashlight from my truck and came back. Lay flat on my stomach, with my cheek against the cold concrete shining the beam along the surface at a sharp angle. There, a seam, barely visible, filled with years of dirt and dust, but definitely there. It ran 6 feet north to south, exactly where the dense sound stopped. 2 feet wide, the shape of a door. I sat up. Knocked again with my knuckles, then with the heel of my hand. The sound was different from the rest of the floor, not the hollow echo of empty space below, but the dull thud of something insulated. Something built with layers. This wasn't natural settling. This wasn't a foundation quirk or drainage design. This was construction, professional, careful construction. Someone had poured this section of floor over something deliberately. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing, who'd taken the time to match the concrete color and texture to the rest, who'd hidden a seam so carefully that you'd never see it unless you were looking from the right angle with the right light. I sat back on my heels, staring at that section of floor, running the calculations a carpenter runs without thinking lumber, concrete labor hours. Someone had spent days building this seal. That evening, I went back to my truck for the pry bar, stood over the seal section with my hands shaking and my breath coming too fast. Whatever Nora had hidden here, she'd hidden it for a reason. The pry bar hit concrete at 7:15 p.m., and 6 feet down, I found more money than I'd earned in 30 years. But first, the seal. I worked the pry bar into the seam I'd found with the flashlight, feeling for purchase in concrete that had been poured with professional precision. It took 20 minutes to break the first edge free, another 15 to work my way around the perimeter. The section came up in one piece, a door-sized slab of concrete 2 inches thick, reinforced with rebar, hinged on one side, with heavy-duty hardware that had been greased recently enough that it didn't squeak. Below it, wooden steps descending into darkness. I sat back on my heels, breathing hard. The steps were cedar. I could smell it even before I shined the flashlight down. 10 steps, maybe 12, leading to a floor I couldn't see. "Nora," I said to the empty barn, "what did you do?" I went down slowly, testing each step with my weight before committing. The air got cooler as I descended, dry, almost clinical in how carefully it had been sealed. At the bottom, my flashlight found a pull chain hanging from the ceiling. I pulled it. Nothing happened, no power to the house, yet no way to test the wiring. Nora had wired this vault into the house electrical system. Whoever built this had done it right, built it to last, built it to work, built it to be here when someone finally came looking. I followed the pipe with my eyes. It ran back toward the house, properly installed with junction boxes and grounding wire. This wasn't recent work. The wire insulation was old, the kind they stopped using 20 years ago. Someone had wired this vault into the house electrical system, professionally, carefully, with the intention that it would last. The vault itself was small, 8 feet by 6. Concrete walls, concrete floor ceiling, high enough that I could stand without ducking. The floor had been swept clean. The walls showed no water damage, no mildew, no signs of settling. And against the far wall, 12 wooden boxes stacked in 2 rows of 6. There are moments in life when the ground shifts and you realize everything you thought you understood was incomplete. This was mine. I crossed the vault in 3 steps, knelt in front of the first box. It was sealed, not nailed shut, but fastened with brass latches that opened smoothly when I pressed the release. The lid lifted on hinges that someone had oiled, inside wrapped in cloth that smelled like cedar and preservation gold bars. I stopped breathing. 4 bars in the first box, each one marked with weight and purity stamps I recognized from every pawn shop window I'd ever passed. 1 kilogram each, 4 kilograms total. My hands shook opening the second box. 6 bars this time, smaller, ½ kilo each, 3 kilograms total. The third box, 4 more kilo bars. I couldn't count. My brain wouldn't do the math. I just kept opening boxes with hands that trembled so badly I could barely work the latches. 12 boxes. All gold, all carefully wrapped and preserved and hidden in a vault my wife had built beneath a barn floor no one wanted to buy. "How long?" I asked for the empty vault. "How long has this been here?" "Nora, how long did you know?" The gold didn't answer. I sat back against the concrete wall, staring at 12 open boxes containing more wealth than I'd seen in my entire life. More than the lumber mill, more than the townhouse, more than every cabinet and dining table and custom bookshelf I'd built in 30 years of carpentry. My wife, who'd clipped coupons and bought store-brand coffee and darned my work socks rather than throw them away, had hidden a fortune beneath a barn floor and never said a word. Then I saw the shelf, small wooden mounted on the wall at eye level near the steps. On it, a leather notebook with ragged edges where pages had been torn out and a single folded piece of paper sealed with wax. I stood on shaking legs, crossed the vault, broke the seal. The paper unfolded in my hands. One word in Nora's careful handwriting. Run! I read it 3 times. I turned the paper over looking for more. Nothing, just that single word. Run! I sat on the bottom step back against the concrete holding that paper in both hands. Nora had known I'd find this. I knew I'd open the vault. Now I'd see the gold and read this note, and her only message was one word telling me to leave. But she'd also known something else. She'd known me. 34 years of marriage. 30 years of watching me work on projects in the garage, seeing me spend weeks on a single custom bookshelf because the joinery wasn't perfect yet, listening to me explain why I couldn't just stand over a mistake when the right answer was to rebuild it from scratch. Nora had known I'd never run. A marriage is a kind of long conversation where some of the most important things get said after one person stops talking. This isn't a warning, I said to the vault. This is a challenge. If I stayed, if I was stubborn enough, persistent enough, carpenter-minded enough to see this through, I'd find the rest. The torn notebook pages, the explanation for the gold, the reason she'd built this vault and sealed it and sent me here with my last $200. This was her last project for me. Not a cabinet, not a dining table, not a bookshelf with perfect dovetailed joints. Understanding. I folded the paper as carefully as if it were something sacred because it was. I wouldn't run. I'd never abandoned a project halfway through, and this was the last thing Nora was asking me to build understanding. But understanding required answers, and the only place to find them was in the records Nora must have left somewhere in this county's history. I spent the night in that vault sleeping on concrete with 12 boxes of gold and a single word telling me to run. In the morning, I locked the barn and drove to Hilldale with a question no one else could answer: what records had Nora left behind? I found proof Nora had been planning for 30 years on page 4 of the 2001 county property records. The Hilldale Public Library opened at 8. I was waiting at the door when Grace Moreland, the librarian for 18 years, unlocked it with a key ring that jangled like wind chimes. Research, she asked not unkindly. Property records, I said, going back about 20 years. She led me to a room that smelled like old paper and electrical heat. Microfiche machine in the corner filing cabinets along one wall, fluorescent lights that hummed like insects. Microfiche can be stubborn, Grace said, pulling open a drawer labeled 1995 to 2005. Let me know if you need help advancing the reels. I worked methodically. Farm address first, 414 Dunmore Farm Road. Then Nora's maiden name, her married name, property transfers, deed recordings. The microfiche advanced with mechanical clicks that counted hours like a clock. By noon, my eyes burned. By 2 p.m., I'd found 3 property tax records and a septic permit from 1998. By 4 p.m., I was ready to quit. Then I found page 4 of the 2001 Williamson County Clerk filings. Family Asset Confidentiality Agreement. Executed April 2001. Signed by Nora Vance and one other party whose name had been redacted per confidentiality statute. Notarized and witnessed. I read it 3 times. Not money laundering, not criminal proceeds. Legitimate family property protected through private agreement, completely legal under Tennessee inheritance law. The gold or whatever asset this agreement covered was rightful property being sheltered from public record for privacy purposes. Nora hadn't been hiding stolen money. She'd been protecting an inheritance. The witness signature sat at the bottom of page 4, small but legible Marcus Sheffield, attorney at law. I knew that name. Marcus Sheffield had been the senior partner at Sheffield and Blackwell before he retired in 2010. Raymond Blackwell, the lawyer who'd read Nora's will, who'd described the farm as worthless contaminated land, had worked under Marcus Sheffield for 15 years. Research is a kind of conversation with the past. You ask questions in silence and wait for the dead to answer through paper. Did you find what you needed? Grace asked when I returned the reels. I found something, I said. I'm not sure what it means yet. She nodded like that made perfect sense. I drove to Franklin with the microfiche printout folded in my jacket pocket and a name I'd found in an online directory, Martha Caldwell, attorney at Law Franklin, Tennessee. Her office was small, second floor above a bakery stairs that creaked a door with frosted glass that said, "Walk in." I did. Martha Caldwell was 48 compact in the way people get when they've spent years carrying weight that doesn't show. Her desk had plants, real ones, healthy green things that needed care. Natural light came through windows she'd left uncurtained. The room felt organized without being sterile. "Help you?" she asked, looking up from a legal pad. "I need a lawyer," I said, "and I'm not sure I can afford one." "Sit down," she said. "Tell me what happened." I talked for 25 minutes without stopping. Nora's funeral, the will reading, Julian taking the house, the farm auction finding the vault, the gold, the 2001 document. Raymond Blackwell's connection to Marcus Sheffield. Martha didn't interrupt, didn't take notes, just listened with eyes that tracked my face like she was reading something written there. When I finished, the silence stretched for 10 seconds. Then she asked, "Are you safe?" I stopped, blinked. "Oh, what?" "Are you safe?" she repeated. "Is anyone threatening you? Do you feel physically secure at the farm?" No one had asked me that. Not Julian, not Chloe, not Raymond Blackwell or Harold Pierce or the county clerk who'd processed my deed. No one had asked if I was safe. I think so," I said. "Okay." Martha pulled a legal pad toward her. "Here's what we're going to do. Don't move anything from that vault. Don't tell anyone else what you found, not family, not friends, not the mailman. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., come back here. I need tonight to think about this properly." "What do I owe you?" I asked. "We'll talk about that tomorrow," she said. "Right now, I need you to go home, lock your doors, and try to sleep." I stood. My legs felt unsteady. "That's what I asked. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I walked in here with a story about hidden gold and a dead wife and a son who stole my house." Martha looked at me for a long moment. "I've been practicing law in Franklin for 12 years, she said. "I've seen a lot of people walk through that door with stories nobody else believed. Most of the time, the people who sound crazy are actually the ones telling the truth." She stood, walked me to the door. "On a 9 a.m., she said, "and Arthur—" I turned. "Lock your doors tonight." When was the last time someone asked if you were safe and actually waited for the truth? The next morning I woke at 5 and drove to the Williamson County Sheriff's Office like Martha had instructed, following the law, making things official, trusting that documentation would protect me the way silence had failed Nora. The sheriff said 4 words that rewrote everything I thought I understood about my wife's final years. "We searched here in 2016, but first the report." The sheriff's office was a low brick building that smelled like coffee and floor wax. I sat in a plastic chair in the lobby for 20 minutes before a deputy called my name and led me down a hallway to a small office where Sheriff Silas Thornton waited. Thornton was 55, a heavy man who moved with the measured attention of someone who'd learned not to rush to judgment. He had a desk covered in paperwork and a window that looked out at the parking lot where my truck sat next to 3 squad cars. "Mr. Vance," he said, shaking my hand. "The deputy said you need to file a discovery report." "I found something on property I legally purchased," I said, "and my attorney told me to document it officially." Thornton pulled out a form and a pen. "Walk me through exactly what you found and when." I told him. The auction, the farm, 3 weeks of repairs, knocking on the barn floor and finding the sealed section, opening it, the vault, the 12 wooden boxes. Gold bars, I said, carefully wrapped and preserved, and a 2001 legal agreement proving its legitimate family inheritance. Thornton wrote steadily, not looking up. "How much gold are we talking about?" "I haven't had it appraised yet," I said. "But Martha Caldwell, my attorney, she estimates somewhere around $3.5 million. The pen stopped. Thornton looked up. "And that's a significant discovery," he said carefully. "Yes, sir. And you're reporting it voluntarily." My attorney said it was the right thing to do, make it official, create a paper trail in case anyone tries to claim I was hiding assets or found stolen property. Thornton nodded slowly. "You did the right thing reporting this. Most people wouldn't." He asked more questions. When did I buy the farm? How much did I pay? Who else knew about the discovery? I answered everything with the precision I'd learned from 30 years of measuring lumber, exact, verifiable, leaving no room for interpretation. "The 2001 agreement," Thornton said. "You have a copy?" At my attorney's office, microfiche printout from the county clerk, family asset confidentiality filing, completely legal under Tennessee inheritance law. Thornton made another note. Then he paused, pen hovering over paper. The words hung in the air like a held breath. We searched here in 2016. I'm sorry, I said. Thornton set down his pen and pulled open a filing cabinet behind his desk, flipped through folders until he found one marked with a case number and the address 414 Dunmore Farm Road. You know what's interesting, he said, opening the file. We had a report filed on this address back in 2016. Anonymous tip about large property being stored here. Caller claimed there was valuable material hidden on the premises, possibly stolen or illegally obtained. My chest went tight. We took it seriously. Thornton continued reading from the report. Sent 2 deputies out in October 2016. They had a warrant based on the specifics of the tip. Searched the house, the barn, and outbuildings. Found nothing. Property appeared abandoned. No signs of recent occupancy or storage activity. We closed the case as unfounded. 2016. The year Nora sealed the vault. Someone called in a tip, I said slowly, trying to get police to search the farm. Anonymous call, Thornton confirmed. Male voice wouldn't identify himself. Said he had reliable information about valuable property stored at that address. When we didn't find anything, we figured it was either a hoax or someone with bad information. But it wasn't bad information. Someone had known about the gold, and they'd tried to use law enforcement to seize it. Julian. It had to be Julian. My son had known about the inheritance 2 years before Nora died. He'd called in an anonymous tip trying to trigger a police investigation that would lead to asset seizure. And when the search came up empty, he'd realized Nora had moved it, or hidden it better. So, he'd waited for Nora to die, waited for the will to be read, waited for me to be vulnerable and alone. Then he'd taken everything else. Mr. Vance, Thornton's voice pulled me back. You all right? The anonymous tip, I said. You still have a recording? No, just notes from the deputy who took the call. Why? Because I think I know who made it. Thornton leaned back in his chair, waiting. My son, I said. Julian Vance. He's the one who inherited the lumber mill and townhouse from my wife's estate. He's the one who gave me 48 hours to vacate my home. And he's the one who had the most to gain if police seized assets from a property he thought his mother owned. That's a serious accusation, Thornton said. It's the truth, I said. Nora sealed that vault in 2016, the same year someone called in that anonymous tip. She knew. She knew Julian was trying to steal from us, and she protected the inheritance by sealing it so well your deputies couldn't find it. Some kinds of love are so quiet you don't hear them until the person who loved you is gone. She never told me, I said. Never said a word about Julian betraying us. She just built a vault, sealed it professionally, prepared legal documents, spent 2 years making sure that when she died, I'd be protected, even though it meant living with that knowledge alone. Thornton was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to note all of this in the file, he finally said. And I'm going to recommend you keep your attorney close. If your son was willing to try asset seizure in 2016, finding out you actually discovered something valuable might prompt him to escalate. I understand. Thornton stood, offered his hand again. You need anything from this office you call? What you're dealing with, family turning on family over money, it's the worst kind of case. But you're doing it right. Documentation, legal counsel, official reports. Keep doing that. I drove home with the windows down, even though it was cold, needing the air on my face to stay clear-headed. Nora had known for 2 years that our son was trying to steal from us. She'd built the vault sealed, it prepared the documents, and never said a word, because she knew if I learned the truth, I'd confront him and might lose everything. She'd played the long game, for me. That night I sat at the kitchen table thinking about Nora's silence. 2 years of knowing Julian had betrayed us. 2 years of building protection without saying a word. She'd understood something I was only beginning to learn. Some battles require patience more than confrontation. The threat arrived at 11:47 p.m. 16 words telling me I'd done exactly the right thing by filing that report. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter where I'd left it after heating up a can of soup. Unknown number, text message. We know you found something. Don't do anything stupid. I read it 3 times. Felt my chest tighten the way it does when you realize someone's been watching closer than you knew. Then I did what 30 years of carpentry had taught me. I followed procedure. Screenshot, save, open email, forward to Martha with the subject line, Received 11:47 p.m. Sent. Then I made coffee and sat at that kitchen table until 4 in the morning. I gave myself exactly 5 minutes to be afraid. That was the deal I'd made years ago when I'd nearly lost 3 fingers to a table. Saw 5 minutes to feel whatever panic wants to do. Then back to thinking clearly. Fear is just information. It tells you something matters, but it doesn't tell you what to do about it. The text told me several things. First, someone knew I'd found the gold. Either Julian had figured it out, or the sheriff's report had leaked, or someone had been watching the farm closer than I'd realized. Second, they wanted me scared. Scared people make fast decisions. Fast decisions in the dark are usually wrong. Third, I'd done the right thing filing that official report. Because now this threat was evidence. Screenshot with timestamp. Forwarded to my attorney. Documented. Waiting for dawn isn't weakness. It's understanding that fear makes worse decisions than patience. The sun came up at 5:43. I was still sitting at that table with cold coffee and a plan that consisted of 2 words, tell Martha. She called at 7:15. I got your email, she said without preamble. How are you? Still here, I said. Good. Don't respond to that number. Don't engage. If they call, don't answer. If they show up, call 911 first, then me. Understand? Warmed, was ich den Wort. Joanne? Understood. And Arthur, this is actually good news. How? Because they're scared, Martha said. People who are confident in their legal position don't send anonymous threats at midnight. They file motions. This tells me they know they don't have a case. She was right, but knowing someone's desperate doesn't make them less dangerous. A week later, the same unknown number called while I was working in the yard, replacing fence posts that had rotted through. I almost didn't answer. Then I remembered something Martha had said. If they're stupid enough to contact you directly, let them. Just record everything. I pulled out my phone, turned on the voice recording app, then answered on speaker. Hello? Dad? Julian's voice. Smooth, calculated. The tone he used when he wanted something. We need to talk. I set the phone on the fence post between us, metaphorically speaking. Kept my hands steady on the post hole digger. About what? About what you found. And about handling this like a family instead of involving lawyers and sheriffs. I'm listening, I said. We can handle this privately, Julian said. Father to son. A fair split that acknowledges my legitimate claim to my mother's estate. No courts, no lawyers taking half of everything in fees. Just us working it out the way Mom would have wanted. I dug the post hole deeper, let him talk. The $80,000 in 2014 was just an advance on what was always meant to be shared, Julian continued. Mom knew I needed help with the business. She would have wanted me to have a proper share of the family assets, not just the mill and the house everything. There it was, $80,000 in 2014, on a recorded line, voluntary admission of the unauthorized distribution. Call my lawyer, I said. His dad don't be sent. I hung up. I stood there in the yard with dirt on my hands and my son's voice saved in a recording file that proved he'd taken money he wasn't entitled to. I called Martha. He just called, I said. I recorded it. Please tell me you didn't threaten him or... I said, hello, I'm listening, and call my lawyer. Then I hung up. Silence on the other end, then send me that file right now. I did, waited while she listened. When she called back, her voice had changed. Sharp, energized. You just gave me what I needed most, she said. Voice evidence. Voluntary, not coerced. He called you. You didn't initiate contact. You didn't threaten or pressure him. And he admitted on a recorded line to receiving $80,000 from your wife's estate in 2014, 2 years before she executed the will, 4 years before her death. What does that mean legally? It means he admitted to unauthorized distribution of marital assets without legal basis. It means he just handed us proof of financial misconduct. It means he grabbed himself by the neck. I sat down on the porch steps. He thought he was pressuring me, I said. He was, Martha said. But you were smarter. You documented instead of engaging. You followed procedure instead of emotion. And now, we have his voice saying things his lawyers are going to have a very hard time explaining away. Some people dig their own graves with words 1 sentence at a time, not realizing the recording is already running. What happens now? I asked. Now I build a case, Martha said. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., we need to talk strategy. I stood in the farmyard, looking out at the field, where Nora used to walk in the evenings, holding the phone that now contained my son's voice, admitting to a crime he didn't know he was confessing. He'd called to threaten me into compliance. Instead, he'd handed me the rope. The question was whether I had the stomach to use it. The answer came to me on the drive to Martha's office the next morning. I had the stomach ache. What I needed was the strategy. Martha froze $3.5 million with a single emergency filing, and that same afternoon, a stranger showed up at my gate offering help I didn't know I needed. But first, the law. Martha's office smelled like coffee and printer paper. She had Julian's recorded call on her computer, the audio file open in a program that showed the sound waves like a heartbeat monitor. Julian has no legal claim he can bring to court without exposing himself, she said, pulling up a document on her screen. They will explicitly divide assets. You bought the farm legally at public auction. He waived all rights to it in writing. The gold is family property you discovered on land you own. So I keep it, I said. Eventually, but first we have to protect it, because Julian can't sue no legal basis, so he'll use other methods. Threats, intimidation, maybe worse. I thought about the midnight text message. The phone call is trying to pressure me into a private agreement. What's the counter? I asked. We filed an emergency injunction today. The gold goes into court, escrow sealed, documented untouchable by anyone. Not Julian, not you, not the Easter Bunny. It stays frozen until a judge formally determines rightful ownership. How long will that take? Months, Martha said. But you'll be protected the entire time. And when Julian realizes he can't touch, it can't threaten you into giving it up, can't manipulate the system, he'll either give up or make a mistake. She filed the paperwork that afternoon. $3.5 million frozen with a judge's signature and a court seal. I drove back to the farm, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. That's when I found Everett at the gate. He was leaning against a truck that had seen better decades, arms crossed, waiting like he'd been there a while. 28 years old, wearing work boots and a flannel shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to show forearms roped with the kind of muscle you get from real labor. I recognized him before he said a word. Everett Hayes. My apprentice from the woodworking shop, back when I still had a shop to run. I'd taught him joinery and finished work for 2 years before Julian sold the business out from under both of us. Everett, I said, getting out of the truck. I heard the news, he said, and I came to help you. What news? Julian took your house, that you're living out here alone, that you found something on this property and he's going after it. Small towns don't keep secrets well. You taught me the trade, Everett continued. Taught me like I mattered. Like the work mattered. I figured if you needed help, I could pay that back. I looked at him. I am 28 years old, calloused hands, showed up without being asked. I thought about Julian. I am 30 years old, expensive suits, called to threaten me. Sometimes help arrives from the people you trained, not the people you raised, and that tells you everything about legacy. I don't have much to offer, I said. You have work, Everett said. That's enough. I opened the gate. That weekend, I drove to Brenda Whitfield's house, 2 miles down the road, a small place with chickens in the yard and a porch that sagged in the middle but held. Brenda was 65, had lived there long enough to remember when this county was more farmland than suburbs. She opened the door before I knocked. Arthur Vance, she said. I wondered when you'd come asking about what? About Nora, and that conversation I witnessed in 2016. We sat on her porch with sweet tea that was too sweet and a view of fields turning green in the June heat. Nora came to me that summer, Brenda said. Asked me to witness something. I didn't know what, but Nora was always private about her business, so I said yes. What did you witness? Julian. He came to the farm. Your farm. I mean, Nora's farm, asking about assets. Family property. He was pushy about it, demanding to know what was stored there. I set down my tea. Nora told him straight to his face that all farm assets had been moved by her former partner in 2015. Said the property was empty except for debt and contaminated land. Not worth the paper the deed was printed on. He believed her. He did. Left angry, but he believed her. I'd never seen Nora lie before that day. She was protecting something, and she wanted me there so I could testify to exactly what she said if anyone ever asked. My chest felt tight. She knew, I said. In 2016, she already knew Julian was trying to steal from us. I think so, Brenda said. And she played him, lied to buy time, sealed whatever she was protecting so well that when he finally made his move, there was nothing for him to take. Love is sometimes a lie told to protect someone from a truth they're not ready to carry. Nora had discovered Julian's betrayal 2 years before she died. She'd crafted a deception, sealed the vault, prepared the documents, and lived with that knowledge alone, because telling me would have meant confrontation, and confrontation might have cost us everything. So she played chess, for me, to the very end. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked Brenda. "Because Nora asked me to," she said. "Told me if anyone ever came asking about that conversation, especially you, I should tell them exactly what happened. She said you'd need to know she was protecting you, not hiding from you." I drove home that evening, thinking about the 3 people who'd shown up in my life that week. Martha, who asked if I was safe, Everett, who came to help, and Brenda, who remembered the day Nora lied to protect me. And I thought about Julian, who'd called to threaten me and accidentally confessed to a crime. The sides were forming. I just had to decide how hard I was willing to fight. The decision made itself that night. I'd fight as hard as necessary. The real question was whether I'd be smart enough to win. I gave myself 5 minutes to be afraid that night, sitting on the porch steps in the cold. Then I went back to the only thing I've ever known how to do: work. The temperature had dropped into the 40s. June in Tennessee can surprise you that way: hot during the day, cold enough at night that you see your breath. I sat on those porch steps until the wood pressed cold through my jeans and my hands went numb. 5 minutes of fear. That was the deal I'd made with myself after Nora died. 5 minutes to feel whatever panic or grief or anger wanted to do. Then back to thinking clearly. I set a timer on my phone, sat there in the dark watching fireflies blink in the field, and letting myself understand exactly how much danger I was in. Julian had lawyers, money, connections. He'd already taken my house and my workshop. He'd tried to pressure me into giving up the gold. When that failed, he'd go to the next tactic, and the next, and the next. I had a farm no one else wanted, and a fortune I couldn't touch yet. The timer buzzed. 5 minutes done. I stood up and went inside to make an inventory. Legal farm purchased at public auction documented mine. Good lawyer Martha, who asked if I was safe before she asked about the money. Loyal apprentice Everett, who showed up without being asked. Neighbor testimony Brenda, who witnessed Nora's 2016 deception. Recorded confession Julian admitting to $80,000 in unauthorized distribution. And Nora's plan. Whatever else she'd hidden, whatever other moves she'd prepared. Not much, but enough. Patience wasn't a weakness, it was a tool, and I'd spent 30 years learning how to use tools. The next day, Everett and I descended into the vault with notepads and a calculator. "Do you want me to write this down, or just remember?" Everett asked. "Write it," I said. "Everything is documented." We worked methodically, pull each bar from its wrapping, check the weight stamp, verify the purity mark, record, stack, move to the next box. 11 hours later, we sat on the vault floor surrounded by 12 empty boxes and neat stacks of gold bars arranged by weight. Everett read from his notepad. 47 1-kilo bars, 63 half-kilo bars, 22 quarter-kilo bars. At current market prices, he ran the numbers on his phone calculator. $3.5 million, he said, give or take fluctuations. I sat there looking at stacks of metal that represented more money than I'd earned in 30 years of carpentry. "What are you going to do with it?" Everett asked. "Keep it," I said. "It's mine." Counting money is different when it's not yours. Yet each bar a question, each stack a responsibility. You're not sure you're ready to carry. "Your wife saved this," Everett said quietly. "Hid it, protected it. Must have taken her years." "Decades," I said. "This is her family's estate, legitimate inheritance protected by a 2001 confidentiality agreement. She could have spent it, sold it, done anything with it. Instead, she sealed it in a vault and left it for me." "That's love," Everett said. "That's strategy," I said. "But yeah, it's love too." 3 days later, Martha called with news. "The injunction is approved," she said. "As of this morning, that gold is in an official court escrow, sealed, untouchable. No one moves a single bar without a judge's order." "How long until the hearing?" I asked. "Months, maybe longer. But Arthur, I need you to understand something about how your wife set this up." "I'm listening." "The $200, Martha said. "The auction price, it wasn't bad luck or coincidence." "What do you mean?" "Your wife deliberately tanked the farm's apparent value, tax debt, contaminated land, worthless property. She documented everything to make it look like a liability no one would want. Then she let it go to a county auction knowing you'd be the only bidder." I sat down. "Why?" Because as the sole auction purchaser you own it, absolutely, Martha said. Not through inheritance, through purchase. If she'd left it to you in the will, Julian would have contested and courts would likely divide equally between children. But purchased property sole legal ownership. Julian has zero claim. She planned the auction, I said slowly. She engineered it, Martha said. Your wife was the smartest person I've ever encountered. She understood that sometimes the best legal defense is making yourself invisible until you're ready to fight. How does a woman plan her widower's survival 2 years before she dies without him ever suspecting she's preparing for war? There's one more thing, Martha said. Julian has gone completely quiet. No calls, no texts, no contact through his lawyers, nothing. That's good, right? No, Martha said. That's silence more dangerous than threats. It means he's recalculating, finding new pressure points, preparing something we haven't seen yet. What do I do? Stay alert, Martha said. Document everything. Keep Everett close. And don't assume silence means surrender. That evening, I stood in the barn looking at the sealed floor where the vault had been hidden for years, and I understood the silence from Julian wasn't retreat. It was the sound of a man with lawyer Raymond behind him, recalculating his tactics, finding new pressure points, preparing for the next move. Martha was right. The quiet was more dangerous than the threats. Martha had warned me the silence would be strategic. I hadn't expected it to be patient. The silence lasted 19 days before I stopped waiting for Julian to make his move and started building defenses he wouldn't see coming. Day 1, nothing. Day 5, still nothing. By day 10, I was checking my phone every hour expecting the next threat, the next pressure tactic, something. Martha called weekly. It's silence from someone like Julian advised by someone like Raymond. That's not retreat, she said on day 12. That's strategy. What should I be preparing for? I asked. Out-of-court pressure, break-ins, intimidation, anything he can't do legally while the injunction holds. The gold is untouchable through proper channels, so they'll look for improper ones. Day 19, I stopped waiting and started working. Everett was in the barn reinforcing the door hinges when I found him. New project, I said. Security system. Kimbra. Yes, better, I said. Something Julian can't defeat with money or lawyers. We spent 3 days in my workshop, building 14 identical mechanisms from oak and brass. Hidden wooden latches, the kind I'd been designing in my head for 30 years, but never had reason to actually build. No external keyhole, no obvious mechanism, just wood grain and pressure points only I knew how to find. How does this one work? Everett asked, examining the first latch. See, this grain pattern looks like natural variation, right? He nodded. Press here no quarter-inch left. Feel where the grain changes direction slightly. That's the release point. Took me 6 hours to cut it precisely enough that only the right pressure in the right spot triggers the mechanism. Everett tried, failed, I tried again. I can't find it, he said. Exactly. Waiting for an attack is different from preparing for one. Waiting makes you a target. Preparing makes you a problem. We installed the first latch on the filing cabinet in the farmhouse office, the one holding copies of everything Martha had filed with the court. Land deed, auction receipt, injunction order. The latch fit flush with the wood. Unless you knew it was there, you'd never see it. And even if you knew, you'd need to understand exactly how pressure and grain and 30 years of carpentry expertise combined to create a lock that had no key. How many total? Everett asked. 14, I said. One for every cabinet that matters. We worked methodically. Kitchen drawer where I kept the 2001 agreement printout. Bedroom closet safe, not the safe's combination lock, but a wooden panel I built to cover it. Barn storage for the tools I'd moved from my old workshop. Each latch is unique. Each trigger point is different. You really think someone will try to break in? Everett asked on day 3 of installation. Raymond Blackwell isn't the type to give up. Because a judge said no, I said. He's the type to look for what the judge didn't say no to. And Julian. Julian's been trying to take what isn't his since before Nora died. The injunction stops him legally, but desperate people don't always stay legal. We installed latch number 7 on the desk drawer, the one holding Julian's recorded confession. I'd made 3 backup copies, one with Martha, one in a safety deposit box, one here protected by a piece of oak that looked like decorative trim. It's the trigger is here, I told Everett, guiding his hand. Feel it? I think so. Now try to open it without my help. He worked at it for 10 minutes, got frustrated. I tried forcing it. The wood held. Yet this is actually brilliant, he said. This is survival, I said. Julian can buy lawyers and bribe officials and pressure witnesses, but he can't buy 30 years of knowing wood better than he knows his own reflection. By day 6, all 14 latches were installed. I walked through the house testing each one. Office filing cabinet held. Kitchen drawer held. Bedroom panel held. Every mechanism I'd built worked exactly as designed and visible until you knew where to look, impenetrable unless you understood how. There's a particular satisfaction in building something your enemy can't break. It's not arrogance, it's just knowing your craft better than anyone else alive. Everett found me in the workshop that evening, cleaning up sawdust and putting away tools. "You really think this will stop them?" he asked. "I think it'll slow them down," I said. And slow is sometimes the same as stop when you're talking about people who expect easy answers. What if they bring professionals lockpicks? Lockpicks work on locks, I said. These aren't locks, they're carpentry. You'd need someone who understands wood structure, grain patterns, pressure points. You'd need someone with my skill level and my specific knowledge of how I built each one. That's a pretty small pool of people. "Just you," Everett said. And now you, I said. "Partially, which is why you don't tell anyone else how they work." He nodded. I installed the final latch on the bottom drawer, the one holding copies of the 2001 agreement, the vault inventory, and Julian's recorded confession. The most important documents I owned, protected by a piece of oak that looked like nothing special. Everett asked if I thought someone would really try to break in. I looked at him and said what I'd been thinking for 19 days, not if, but when. The locks would tell us how serious Julian was about getting what he couldn't have legally. The scratches on my filing cabinet told me someone had spent hours trying to open what I'd designed to stay closed and failed. Everett found me standing in the barn at 6 a.m., staring at the back door. It was still shut, still locked, but the frame showed fresh pry marks where someone had worked a crowbar into the gap trying to force it. They'd failed. "They were here," Everett said, touching the scarred wood. "Last night..." "That had to be," I said. "I locked up at 9. These marks are fresh." We walked through the house methodically. Every filing cabinet showed scratches. Every drawer I'd installed a hidden latch on had marks around the edges where someone had tried and failed to pry them open. The office filing cabinet had the worst damage. Deep gouges in the wood where they'd worked at it, trying different angles, different pressure points, searching for the mechanism that didn't exist in any way they understood. "They tried every cabinet," Everett said, running his finger along the scratches. "Look at these marks, they were here for hours." "But they didn't open a single one," I said. I checked the contents. 2001 agreement intact. Vault inventory intact. Julian's recorded confession intact. The intruder had stood in my house working methodically through every lock I'd built and left empty-handed. 30 years of carpentry just paid for itself, I said. Everett looked at the scratches, then at me. Someone desperate enough to break in, but not skilled enough to beat a carpenter's work. I called Sheriff Thornton first, then Martha. Then I got my camera and photographed every scratch, every mark, every piece of evidence that someone had tried to steal what they couldn't have legally. "This proves Julian's escalation," Martha said when I sent her the photos. "Breaking and entering, attempted theft. We'll add it to the file." But I was thinking about something else. Someone had been in my house, in the dark, going through my things, trying to find the evidence that would let Julian take what Nora had protected. And my locks had held. Victory tastes different when you realize it only proves how badly someone wanted to destroy you. Later that afternoon, Everett was cleaning up the barn when he found something that stopped him cold. He came to the house holding my toolbox, the one I'd built when Julian was 7, the one Chloe had held at Nora's funeral with trembling hands. "I was moving this to the workbench," Everett said slowly, "and I noticed the weight was off, too heavy for what's inside." He set it on the kitchen table. "Look at the bottom." I turned it over. A small black device about the size of a quarter, epoxy glued to the wood. Professional, deliberate. A tracking device. "This was glued on professionally," Everett said. "This has been here since..." He didn't finish, but I did. "Since the funeral," I said. "Since Chloe held it." "The funeral," my daughter asked in that sweet voice to hold the toolbox for me. Her hands trembled slightly when she took it. I'd thought it was grief. It wasn't grief. She'd been attaching surveillance equipment to my belongings the day we buried her mother. Every trip to Martha's office, I said, every meeting, every time I left the farm, they knew. "Your daughter," Everett said quietly. I am 24 years old. Chloe, who'd asked about why wood smelled good when she was 4, who'd helped me sand a bookshelf when she was 9, who'd cried at her mother's funeral. Or maybe she hadn't cried. Maybe I'd just seen what I wanted to see. I picked up the device. It was small, sophisticated, the kind you buy online for tracking vehicles or monitoring teenagers, or tracking your father so your brother knows every move he makes. What are you going to do? Everett asked. Document it, I said. Send it to Martha, add it to everything else. I meant, are you going to talk to her? I set the device down on the table. I looked at it for a long time. No, I said. What would I say? Why did you betray me? When did you decide I was the enemy? Was it before or after we buried your mother? Betrayal from your children is a kind of amputation. The limb is gone, but your body keeps expecting it to be there. I need some air, I said. I walked out to the field where Nora used to walk in the evenings, stood there in the cold looking at nothing. The wind cut through my jacket, but I didn't go back inside. My daughter had been feeding information to Julian for months. Every meeting with Martha, every trip to town, every moment I thought I was protecting myself, she'd been sending coordinates to someone trying to destroy me. Everett found me there 20 minutes later. Are you okay? He asked. Yes, I said. The lie came automatically, the kind older people learn to tell when the truth would make standing up impossible, when admitting how much something hurts would mean acknowledging a wound that might not heal. Yes, I'm okay. No, I'm not. But saying it out loud wouldn't change anything, wouldn't make Chloe less of a traitor, wouldn't make Julian less determined to take what he couldn't have, wouldn't bring Nora back to explain why our children turned out this way. So, yes, I was okay. I had to be. I stood in the field, holding that device, thinking about the day of Nora's funeral. Chloe's hands trembling slightly when she took the toolbox. The sweet voice saying, "Let me hold it for you, Dad." She hadn't been trembling from grief. She'd been trembling because she was attaching surveillance equipment to her father's belongings the day we buried her mother. And somewhere in that moment, I understood this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, about family, about children who decided their father was an obstacle to be removed rather than a person to be loved. That's what I understood. Standing in that field, this fight wasn't ending until one side broke completely. The witness signature on Nora's 2001 agreement belonged to Raymond Blackwell's former superior, which meant Raymond had known everything from the beginning. Martha called 2 days after the break-in with news that connected dots I hadn't even known existed. I traced the witness signature on the 2001 agreement, she said. Marcus Sheffield. I remembered that name, the senior partner at the firm where Raymond worked before starting his own practice. Sheffield was Raymond's direct superior for 15 years, Martha continued, which means Raymond had access to that confidentiality agreement before Julian ever hired him. He knew about the gold. He knew about the family estate structure. He knew everything. I sat down. So, Raymond isn't just representing my son, I said slowly. He's part of whatever this was from the beginning. Exactly. This is textbook conflict of interest. An attorney cannot take a case where he has prior undisclosed knowledge that creates competing interests. The Bar Association will want to know why Raymond didn't disclose this connection when Julian hired him. What happens now? I file a formal complaint. The Bar Association investigates. If they find Raymond knowingly concealed a material conflict, this could cost him his license. I thought about Raymond at the will reading, his smooth confidence, the way he'd described the farm as worthless, contaminated land. He'd known exactly what he was doing, not just reading a will, but executing a strategy he'd been positioned for years earlier. You'll file it, I said. Already drafted, Martha said. I just wanted your authorization before submitting. You have it. Conspiracy is like rot in wood. By the time you see it on the surface, it's been spreading through the structure for years. That afternoon, I was in the barn replacing the damaged door frame when Everett called from the house. And someone's parked on the road, he said. Unfamiliar car. Been sitting there for 10 minutes. I walked to the window. Black sedan. Expensive but not new. The kind of car that said money without advertising it. That's Gary Sutton's car, Everett said quietly. Everyone knows it. They call him the Hammer. I knew the name. Gary Sutton, 50 years old, ran a loan operation out of a storefront in Clarksville. Legal on paper, brutal in practice. The kind of man who set deadlines and enforced them. And Julian was sitting in the passenger seat. I could see them through the windshield. Julian's posture was wrong, shoulders tight, head down. The body language of someone being squeezed. Gary was talking. Julian was listening. How much trouble is he in? Everett asked. I watched my son nod at whatever Gary was saying. Real trouble, I said. The conversation in that car lasted maybe 5 minutes. When it ended, Julian got out and walked to his own car parked 50 yards down the road. Gary sat there watching until Julian drove away, then pulled a U-turn and left. Everett looked at me. You think Gary gave him a deadline? I know he did, I said. That's what Gary does, 60 days, 90 at most. Then he foreclosed on whatever collateral Julian put up, which means Julian needs that gold more than ever. Which means Julian is desperate, I said. And desperate people do desperate things. I thought about the break-in, the tracking device, the conspiracy with Raymond, all of it calculated, planned, strategic. But a man being foreclosed on by Gary Sutton doesn't stay calculated. He becomes reckless. Should we be worried? Everett asked. We should be prepared, I said. Watching your child drown in consequences is different from watching a stranger. You still feel the pull to save them, even when you know that saving them would only delay the inevitable. That evening, I sat on the porch steps thinking about Julian at 7 years old, asking about dovetail joints. Julian at 15 helping me build a fence. Julian at 25 telling me about his real estate opportunities that were going to make him rich. Somewhere between 25 and 30, he'd stopped asking and started taking. Stopped building and started scheming. I couldn't pinpoint the moment. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe it was gradual, a series of small choices that accumulated into the man sitting in Gary Sutton's car, getting squeezed for money he'd borrowed against assets he didn't own. Everett came out with coffee. You could help him, he said quietly. When this is over, when the court releases the gold, you could give him enough to pay off Gary. I thought about that. Thought about writing a check that would save my son from a loan shark's deadline. And I said, why not? Because it wouldn't save him. It would just reset the clock. Julian would take the money, pay off Gary, and 6 months later, he'd be in the same position with a different lender. You can't save someone from their own choices. You can only watch them learn or refuse to learn. That's hard, Everett said. It is, I said, but giving him money would be harder, because then I'd be responsible for what he does with it next. I watched Gary's car pull away with my son inside both of them, driving toward whatever desperate arrangement they'd made. It took 16 days of waiting for Julian's next move, wondering what tactic a desperate man with nothing to lose would try. Then Martha called with news that made every other attack look like practice. The petition alleging I had senile dementia arrived 16 days after my son met with a loan shark, and it was the most dangerous attack anyone had ever launched against me. Martha's voice on the phone had a quality I'd never heard before. Urgent, almost shaken. Raymond filed a petition, she said, requesting court review of your civil capacity. He's alleging senile dementia, inability to manage the property. I sat down at my kitchen table. What does that mean? It means if the court accepts this petition, your ownership freezes. Everything. The farm, the escrow account, all of it goes to court-appointed guardianship, pending psychological evaluation. And who would be appointed guardian? A Siribidas, Akerjront. Next of kin, Martha said, which means Julian. I looked out the window at the field where I'd been working that morning. Fence posts I'd set perfectly straight, measurements I'd calculated to the quarter inch, work that required precision and planning, and a mind that functioned exactly as it should. I'm 58 years old, I said. I know. I run a farm. I built a security system. I documented evidence. I've made every decision clearly and methodically for months. I know, Martha said again, but this is the most dangerous blow they've launched. It's a direct attack on your age, on your competence, on your right to own anything. I understood then. This bypassed every protection we'd built. The injunction didn't matter if the court declared me incompetent to manage my own affairs. The legal farm ownership didn't matter if they said I couldn't be trusted with property. Julian wasn't trying to take the gold anymore. He was trying to take me. What happens now? I asked. We fight it, Martha said. Medical examination, cognitive testing. We prove you're completely alert and capable. But Arthur, she paused. What? This is going to be invasive. They'll test memory, reasoning, and executive function. They'll look for any sign of decline. And the standard for capacity review is lower than you'd think. They don't need to prove you're incompetent, just that there's reasonable concern. There comes a moment in every fight when you realize your opponent isn't trying to win anymore. They're trying to destroy you completely. When can I do the examination? I asked. Martha was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll set it up for this week, but I need you to understand what this means. If they succeed, if the court accepts even part of this petition, Julian becomes your legal guardian. He controls the farm. He controls the escrow. He controls you. I understand, I said. Do you? Because this isn't just about money anymore. This is about whether you have the right to make your own decisions. I understand, I said again. Set up the examination. Before I tell you what happened on that drive home from Martha's office, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think I should fight this petition, or B, if you'd walk away and tell me why in one sentence. Please note, what follows includes fictionalized details for storytelling purposes, but the emotional truth is what matters. I drove back to the farm with the windows down, even though it was cold enough to see my breath. The air hurt my lungs, but I needed it, needed something sharp and real to cut through the numbness trying to settle over my thinking. My father died at 78, sharp as a tack until the last day. He'd been doing carpentry at 75, teaching me techniques I still used. His mind had been clear when he'd explained why mortise and tenon joints held better than screws, why you always measured twice, why patience mattered more than speed. And my son was using a court to say, I'd lost my mind at 58. I thought about Julian at 7 years old, the way he'd held a hammer wrong until I showed him the proper grip, the way he'd learned to nail straight by practicing on scrap wood in the garage, the way he'd ask questions about everything, why wood grain mattered, why some nails bent, why you had to pre-drill hardwood. Somewhere between 7 and 30, that boy who asked questions had become a man who filed legal documents claiming his father had dementia. I pulled over at a rest stop, sat there with the engine running and my hands on the steering wheel. For 10 months, I'd been strategic, patient, controlled. I'd documented everything called the right people, followed legal procedure, built defenses that held. But sitting in that truck looking at nothing, I let myself feel what I'd been pushing down since Nora's funeral. Rage, not the calculated kind, not the kind you channel into productive action, just pure burning fury at what my son had become, at what he was trying to do, at the fact that he'd looked at his father and seen an obstacle to eliminate rather than a person to love. Anger is supposed to be hot, but mine felt cold, like something frozen for so long, it burns when you finally touch it. This was the only time in this entire ordeal, I let myself be truly genuinely angry. Not strategic, not measured, just furious. I sat there for 20 minutes letting it burn through me. Then I put the truck in gear and drove home. Everett was waiting on the porch. He took one look at my face and asked what happened. As Julian says I'm losing my mind, I told him. 5 words. That's all it took to explain the newest attack. Everett didn't ask if it was true, didn't offer sympathy, just said, what do we do? I prove I'm competent, I said. Medical examination, cognitive tests, whatever they want. And if that's not enough, I looked at the farm, the porch I'd rebuilt, the fence posts I'd set, the barn where I'd installed locks that had defeated a break-in attempt. Then I will prove it again, I said, and again, until they understand that a 58-year-old carpenter is sharp enough to outthink a desperate son and his corrupt lawyer. I proved it 3 days later, not with anger or defiance, but with the same methodical precision I'd used to build every piece of furniture in my 30-year career. The neurologist's waiting room smelled antiseptic and defeat. I recognized half the patients from the senior center, their children hovering with clipboards preparing to prove incompetence. I was the youngest person there by at least a decade. The neurologist was a woman named Dr. Sarah Mitchell, early 40s, who looked at me over her glasses and said, "Your son's attorney requested this evaluation. Are you here voluntarily or wearing air or stamdi?" "I'm here to prove I'm competent," I said. "Good," she said. "Let's find out." The testing took 3 hours. Memory exercises: repeat these numbers backward, recall these words after a delay. Describe what you had for breakfast yesterday. Reasoning puzzles: if all roses are flowers and some flowers fade quickly, what can we conclude? Executive function tasks: plan, a route, solve a problem, explain your decision-making process. I worked through each test carefully, not rushing, not second-guessing, just applying the same focus I used when calculating measurements for a custom bookshelf. Dr. Mitchell scored the results while I sat in her office looking at diplomas on the wall. "Mr. Vance," she finally said, Your cognitive function is not just normal for your age, it's significantly above average. Memory, reasoning, executive function, all excellent. No signs of decline, no indicators of concern. So I'm competent, I said. You're sharp, she said. Frankly, sharper than most 58-year-olds I test. Whatever your son's attorney is alleging, it has no basis in medical reality. She signed the official report and handed me a copy. I called Martha from the parking lot. Yo, full competence, I said. The doctor said I'm above average for my age. I'll submit this to the court today, Martha said. But Arthur, I need original documentation of everything else. The torn will pages Nora mentioned in her note. Anything physical that proves manipulation. I'll find it, I said. That afternoon, I climbed into the attic of the farmhouse, a space I hadn't touched since moving in. Boxes stacked against rafters, old furniture covered in dust, 30 years of Nora's family storage. I worked methodically, open each box, check contents, move to the next. 4 hours in, I found it, a wooden box with careful handwriting on the lid for Arthur when it matters. My hands shook opening it. Inside, torn notebook pages, edges ragged where they'd been ripped out. Nora's handwriting filled both sides, dates, amounts notes, about Julian's requests for money, and at the bottom, a stack of vinyl records wrapped in cloth. A sticky note on top of the records yellow with age. Frank Townsend knows everything. How many steps ahead had Nora planned? I sat on the attic floor reading those torn pages. Every conversation she'd had with Julian about money. Every time he'd asked for advances on inheritance. Every manipulation she'd documented in careful detail. She'd known. For years she'd known exactly who Julian was. And she'd left me the evidence I'd need to prove it. I called Martha. I found it, I said. The torn pages, and a name, Frank Townsend. Nora says he knows everything. Let me trace that name, Martha said. 2 days later, we drove to a small cafe in the neighboring town. Frank Townsend was waiting in a corner booth, coffee already ordered. He was mid-70s with the careful stillness of a man who'd spent decades managing other people's money and keeping their secrets. Gray hair neatly combed, hands folded on the table with the practiced patience of someone who understood that financial matters required absolute precision. When we sat down, he looked at me with eyes that saw too much. I knew you'd come, he said. Nora said someone would. She was specific about it. She told me not to reach out first. Said if you needed me, you'd find your way here. Said that was the test. Martha and I exchanged glances. When did Nora talk to you? I asked. 2014, Frank said. Early spring. She came to my house one evening and said she needed to update her account directives. But that wasn't the real reason she came. He took a sip of coffee. She told me Julian was going to try to steal from you after she was gone. Not might. Would. She said she was preparing legal protections, but she needed someone who had direct knowledge of her financial intentions to testify if it ever came to court. Someone who'd managed her accounts long enough to know exactly what she owned and exactly what she intended. And you agreed? Martha asked. I agreed to tell the truth, Frank said. I'd managed Nora's personal accounts since 1988. I reviewed the 2001 confidentiality agreement before she signed it. I knew exactly what those assets were worth and who they legally belonged to. When she asked me to be ready to testify, I said yes. He pulled a folder from a messenger bag beside him. I kept everything. Nora asked me to. 26 years of account records, the original contract review notes, her signed directives. She said if anyone ever contacted me asking about the estate, I should be ready to show them this. The folder was thick, clean, organized with the precision of a man who understood that documentation was the only language courts respected. My hands were steady as I turned the first page. 26 years of Nora's careful financial planning, laid out in columns and dates and signatures, proof that she had known exactly what she was doing and exactly what Julian would try to do. My hands trembled holding the coffee cup Frank had ordered for me, not from fear, not from shock, but from realizing how deeply Nora had understood our son, how far back she'd seen the pattern, how carefully she'd prepared for the moment when that pattern would threaten everything. She knew, I said quietly, even then, even when he was 16. She knew, Frank confirmed, and she loved you enough to prepare protections you'd never know about until you needed them. Martha was making notes. Mr. Townsend, would you be willing to testify if this goes to court? She asked. And that's why I'm here, Frank said. He reached into the messenger bag again and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name is written across the front in Nora's handwriting. Below it, carefully printed, "Open only if Julian contests the will." "She gave me this in 2014, Frank said. "Told me to hold it until someone came asking about Julian. Said if you ever needed it, you'd know." He slid the envelope across the table. I stared at it. Nora's handwriting, sealed for 5 years, waiting. "Nora," I whispered to no one visible, "how much more did you prepare?" The answer came that evening when I climbed back into the attic with the vinyl records Nora had hidden in that box. 7 records. 7 chances to find what Frank's sealed envelope was protecting. The 7th vinyl record, Chet Baker Sings, felt heavier than the others when I lifted it from the dusty attic box. I'd been searching for an hour. The attic was cold despite the spring warmth outside, dust coating everything, cobwebs hanging from rafters that needed repair. The box, labeled "For Arthur When It Matters," sat open in front of me, its contents spread across the plywood floor. 6 vinyl records have already been examined. 6 cardboard sleeves opened, carefully checked, and found empty. Just old jazz albums from the 50s and 60s, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Billie Holiday. Music Nora had never played because she'd never owned a record player. Why vinyl records, Nora?" I said to the empty attic. "You never even owned a record player." Then I noticed something I'd missed the first time through. Small pencil marks on the back of each record sleeve, numbers, 1 through 7. Nora had numbered them, left me instructions on which order to search. I'd been going alphabetically. Wrong, I rearranged them by number. Chet Baker Sings was number 7, the last one. I picked it up. The weight was wrong. Too heavy for just a vinyl record in a cardboard sleeve. My hands shook opening it. Inside, the sleeve pressed flat against the record itself, small pages folded tight. I pulled them out, carefully, old paper edges, ragged where they'd been torn from a larger notebook. Nora's handwriting, the same careful script I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards for 34 years. I sat on the attic floor and unfolded them. The first page was dated April 2001, 18 years ago, before Julian got married, before Chloe was born, before any of this had seemed inevitable. Then the clause that made my breath stop. All disposal rights belong to the holder of the original contract. Property cannot be divided through inheritance claims or by partnership assertions. Personal ownership is absolute and non-transferable except by explicit written consent of the contract holder. I read it 3 times. All disposal rights belong to the holder of the original contract. I was holding the original contract in my hands. The pages Nora had torn from the notebook and hidden in a jazz album from 1956. Julian never had any claim. Not legally, not morally, not ever. How long had she known what Julian would become? I kept reading. The contract was specific. After 2017, the property became Nora's absolute personal asset. No company rights, no inheritance division, no claims from children or extended family unless she explicitly granted them in writing. And she hadn't. There was no written consent, no grant of rights, just this original contract stating clearly that whoever held these pages owned everything. She'd protected it 18 years before Julian tried to take it, 18 years before the will reading, 18 years before I'd bought the farm for $200 at a county auction. Nora had known, not suspected, known. She'd seen something in our son when he was 12 years old that told her he'd grow into a man who'd try to steal from his father, and she'd built legal protections so far in advance that by the time Julian made his move, every door was already locked. I sat in that cold attic with dust in my lungs and tears on my face, holding pages my wife had hidden, knowing I'd need them decades later. The grief that hit me wasn't the sharp pain of loss. It was something deeper, heavier. The weight of understanding how much Nora had loved me, how far ahead she'd planned, how alone she'd carried this knowledge because telling me would have meant confronting Julian years before he'd actually betrayed us. She'd protected me by staying silent, and now holding proof of her protection, I cried for the first time since her funeral. Not from pain, from understanding. "You knew," I whispered to the empty attic. "Even then, even when he was 12, you knew what he was." The tears came harder. My shoulders shook. I let myself feel it, not the anger I'd allowed in the truck after the capacity petition, but the grief I'd been holding back for months. The loss of my wife, who'd loved me enough to prepare for war I didn't know was coming. The loss of my son, who'd proven Nora right about his nature. I cried until my throat hurt and my eyes burned. Then I wiped my face and read the final page. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, dated 2014, "Addendum. If Julian contests beyond this point, see Frank Townsend. Additional documentation held in a sealed envelope. 2014, the year Nora had visited Frank, the year she'd given him that sealed envelope, 5 years before Julian filed the capacity petition. 5 years before I'd needed any of this. She'd known that far ahead. My breath caught. The envelope. Frank's sealed envelope with my name on it. The one he'd slid across the cafe table yesterday. I'd left it in my truck, hadn't opened it, hadn't even thought about it since bringing Frank's folder of Julian's high school records to Martha. But Nora's addendum said it held additional documentation. Evidence beyond what I'd already found. I climbed down from the attic with the contract pages and called Martha before I'd even reached the kitchen. My hands were still shaking from crying, but my voice was steady. Martha went silent for 10 seconds after I read her the contract clause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Martha, I'm here," she said. Then after another pause, "Read that clause again, the one about disposal rights." I read it carefully. "All disposal rights belong to the holder of the original contract. Property cannot be divided through inheritance claims or company partnership assertions. Personal ownership is absolute." The silence stretched. Then Martha said 3 words that changed everything. "You just won." I sat down at the kitchen table. "What? You just won." This contract is ironclad. Dated 2001, properly executed, witnessed by a practicing attorney. It establishes that Nora had absolute personal ownership after 2017. No inheritance division, no claims from children unless she granted them in writing. "And she didn't grant them anything," I said. "Exactly, which means Julian never had a legal claim, not to the gold, not to anything. Nora gave you a fortress 18 years ago. Julian's attacking sandcastles." I looked at the contract pages spread on my kitchen table. "What happens now? Now we file this with the court, along with your medical competence report, Frank's testimony, and every piece of evidence we have. The capacity petition collapses. The entire case collapses. Julian has nothing." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. "How long until court?" "I'll push for an emergency hearing. Maybe a week. But Arthur, you won. The legal battle is over." 3 days later, Julian and Chloe's car pulled into my driveway. I was working in the barn when Everett came to find me. "Your kids are here," he said quietly. "Both of them." I walked to the house, turned on my phone's recording app before I opened the door, set the phone on the porch railing screen down, red light hidden. Then I stepped outside. Julian stood on the porch steps wearing jeans and a button-down shirt instead of his usual suit. Chloe beside him in a sweater that had belonged to Nora, both of them looking concerned, caring, family. "Dad," Julian said, "we're not here to fight. We're here to find something fair for everyone." I leaned against the porch post, waited. "This legal battle," Chloe said. "It's tearing the family apart. Mom wouldn't have wanted this." "What would Mom have wanted?" I asked. Julian smiled like a man offering charity to someone he'd already robbed. "A fair split," he said. 1/3 each. That's what family means. What Mom meant when she left the estate. She wanted all of us taken care of. 1/3 each," I repeated. Chloe nodded. "You keep the farm. We'll split the rest. The assets Mom left. Fair and simple. No more courts, no more lawyers." I looked at them both, my children, standing on my porch asking me to give them millions of dollars that legally belonged to me. "Tell me about the toolbox," I said. Chloe's face went pale. "What?" Julian asked. "The toolbox," I said to Chloe. "The one you held for me at the funeral, the day we buried your mother. Do you remember that evening?" Her hands started shaking. "I don't—" "Because I remember," I said. "You took it from me, said I shouldn't have to carry anything. Your hands were trembling. Dad, I don't know what—" "You attached a tracking device," I said quietly, "to my toolbox at your mother's funeral." Julian's jaw tightened. Chloe looked at him, then back at me. "We were worried about you," she said. The sweet voice was gone. This was different, harder. "You were making decisions that didn't make sense. We needed to know you were safe." I looked at my daughter, 24 years old, standing on her mother's porch offering me worry as an explanation for surveillance equipment attached to my belongings at her mother's funeral. She was still trying, still choosing the lie over the truth even now, even caught. "Safe," I repeated. "Yes," Julian said. "And now we're trying to help you avoid a legal disaster. If you don't cooperate, we have legal plans you won't like." There it was, the shift from family to threat. What kind of plans? I asked. Chloe stepped forward. Julian has legitimate rights to Mom's estate, rights that go back years. If you force this to court, there are people in this county who won't leave you alone if we ask them not to. Is that a threat? I asked. It's reality, Julian said. You're 58 years old, living alone on a farm you can barely maintain, making enemies of your own children over money. How do you think that looks? My hand rested steady on the porch railing, inches from my phone, recording every word, the steadiest my hands had been in weeks. I think it looks like a father protecting what his wife left him, I said, from a son who's been trying to steal it since before she died. Julian's expression hardened. We're done here. He turned and walked to the car. Chloe followed, but slower. She looked back once. You could have chosen a family, she said. I did, I said. I chose the one who prepared for this, the one who knew what you'd become. Their car pulled away, gravel crunching under tires. I watched until they disappeared down the road. Then I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and texted Martha, have evidence of threats and extortion, recorded 10 minutes ago. Her reply came in seconds. Court hearing is Monday. This changes everything. Everett's voice on the phone at 11 p.m. carried the careful calm of a man who'd already called the sheriff. There's a car at the road's end with its lights off. I was already pulling on my boots. How long? 5 minutes. Headlights went dark when it turned off the main road. I grabbed my phone and dialed Silas Thornton's direct line. The sheriff answered on the first ring. Already on my way, Arthur. Everett called me first. Stay inside. Through the kitchen window, I could see the barn's security light, casting long shadows across the gravel. The vault sat 50 yards beyond, behind the old equipment shed, where Nora used to store her pottery wheels. Julian knew exactly where it was. He'd helped Everett move it into place 3 years ago, back when we still pretended we were family. My phone buzzed. Martha's text read, Silas just called me. Do not go outside. Let him handle it. I texted back, I'm not going anywhere. But I was watching. Every window on the ground floor gave me a different angle on the property. I moved from kitchen to dining room to living room, tracking the darkness beyond the security light's reach. Then I saw him. Julian's silhouette appeared near the equipment shed, moving fast and low, like he thought he was being tactical. He had something in his hand looked like bolt cutters. The vault's outer door had a padlock that could probably stop a determined teenager. What he didn't know was that the inner door had a biometric lock that Everett had installed last month. He was going to cut through the padlock and find absolutely nothing he could access. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The moment Julian's bolt cutters touched the padlock, the barn's floodlights exploded to life. Everett had wired them to motion sensors 2 weeks ago. Julian froze like a deer, his face turned up toward the sudden brightness, and I saw something in his expression that made my chest tighten pure desperation. Silas's cruiser came down the drive without sirens, just the hard white spotlight that pinned Julian against the vault door. Put the tools down and step away from the structure. Julian dropped the bolt cutters. His hands went up slowly. Even from the house, I could see him shaking. What makes a man betray everything he was raised to be? Is it greed alone, or does desperation have its own gravity that pulls you past the point where you can turn back? I stepped out onto the porch as Silas was reading Julian his rights. My son, 30 years old, wearing dark clothes like a common thief, his face illuminated by the cruiser's spotlight, wouldn't look at me. Attempted burglary. Silas said, his voice professionally neutral. Breaking the escrow agreement constitutes theft of secured assets. You have anything to say, Julian? Julian finally turned toward me. Dad, I just wanted to talk. I wanted to see at 11 p.m. with bolt cutters to talk. His mouth worked silently for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression, anger replacing desperation. It should have been mine. All of it. You turned everyone against me. I didn't have to turn anyone, I said quietly. You did that yourself. Silas put Julian in the cruiser. As the taillights disappeared up the drive, Everett walked over from the barn. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. Motion sensors worked perfectly, he finally offered. Yeah, they did. Coffee, I asked. Coffee sounds good. 3 days later, Martha called with news that hit like a thunderbolt. Chloe's cooperating with the prosecutors. I set down my coffee mug carefully. What? She walked into the district attorney's office yesterday morning with her own lawyer. She's giving them everything, the entire scheme from the beginning. Who planned what? Who said what? Every conversation about inheritance. Why would she? Immunity deal, or close to it. Suspended sentence probation, no jail time if her testimony leads to conviction. I walked to the window. Outside, the morning sun was turning the frost on the pasture fence into diamond points of light. Somewhere in a county office building, my daughter was trading her brother's freedom for her own. What exactly is she telling them? I asked. Martha's voice held a note I couldn't quite identify, something between satisfaction and sadness. Everything we already knew, but from the inside. She's confirming that Julian initiated the inheritance scheme, that he manipulated the estate value estimates, that he pressured her to support his version of events, the recorded threats from your porch. She's explaining the full context, how Julian promised her a share if she helped him break the escrow and access the vault. Jesus! There's more. She told them about a second plan. If the legal route failed, Julian was going to claim you were mentally incompetent. He had already contacted a psychologist about competency evaluations. I had paperwork ready. My hand tightened on the phone. The competency angle was new. That was pure Julian, always 3 moves ahead, always with a backup strategy. The night raid wasn't desperation, I said slowly. It was impatience. Probably. The Monday hearing was coming up fast. He knew he had the 2001 contract. He was running out of legal options. After Martha hung up, I sat at the kitchen table where Nora and I had shared 30 years of coffee and conversation. The house felt enormous around me. I kept thinking about a summer morning 26 years ago. Chloe was 4 years old, standing in my workshop while I planted a piece of cherry wood. The curls fell away from the blade in perfect ribbons, and she'd picked one up, held it to her nose. "Why does wood smell good, Daddy?" I'd knelt down beside her, breathing in the sweet cherry scent. "Because it's honest. It shows you exactly what it is." She'd nodded solemnly, like I'd revealed some profound truth. Now I stared out at the frost-covered pasture and wondered when she forgot. The email notification arrived at 7 a.m. with the subject line, "Urgent New Evidence Submitted by Raymond Blackwell, Esquire." I was still at the kitchen table thinking about 4-year-old Chloe and cherrywood curls. The notification pulled me into something sharper. Why was he submitting evidence? I forwarded it to Martha and called her. She answered immediately. "I'm looking at it now," she said. "Come to my office in 30 minutes. I sat across from Martha's desk while she scrolled through documents, her expression shifting from cautious to incredulous. "Raymond just handed us the case on a silver platter," she said. "What?" I asked, leaning in. "He submitted everything to save his own license," Martha explained as she clicked through files. "Confidential messages between him and Julian, planning documents, proof that he personally altered the signature on the lumber mill contract appraisal. There's a forensic examiner's report that Julian commissioned, then buried when it showed forgery." I stared at the screen. Julian had proof his own case was fraudulent, and hid it. Raymond's affidavit admits he knew the contract was altered. He's claiming Julian pressured him, but it doesn't matter. The evidence is ironclad. "When the ship sinks," I said, "everyone swims for themselves." Martha nodded. "Julian's lawyer just became our best witness." She printed 73 pages, laying out 18 months of conspiracy. Messages where Julian called me the old man who doesn't know what he has. Plans to declare me incompetent. Instructions to Raymond about managing the appraisal. "This is everything," Martha said. "Julian has no defense left. The 2001 contract proves Nora's competence. Chloe's testimony shows the scheme. The recorded threats show extortion. And now, his own lawyer's evidence proves fraud." I picked up a page, a text exchange from April 2019. "Julian, the gold is mine by right. Legal system just needs to catch up with reality. Raymond, I'll make it happen." Even his own lawyer chose survival over loyalty, I said. Martha's expression held satisfaction without joy, victory without triumph. My son faced criminal charges. My daughter had turned state's witness. My family had destroyed itself. "The hearing is tomorrow at 9 a.m., Martha said. "With this submission, it's just formality. Julian's legal position is gone." I drove home through late afternoon, cold, the sun setting behind the western ridge like old bruises spreading across the sky. How does a father measure the distance between the son he raised and the man who tried to destroy him? Is it counted in years or lies, or the specific moment when love turned to calculation? I didn't have dinner. At 10 p.m., I went down to the vault. The cellar stairs creaked as they had creaked for 40 years. The air grew colder with each step, carrying earth and metal smell soil, and concrete and stone. I sat on the wooden steps, and looked at the 3 boxes in dim light. 350 gold bars worth $3.5 million. Nora's secret. Nora's war chest assembled over decades to protect me from a threat I hadn't known existed. How long had she known what Julian was? How many years had she sat across from him at family dinners, watching with a mother's eyes that saw deeper than mine? I thought about her coming down here alone month after month, year after year, planning, preparing, creating the 2001 contract with Harold Pierce, building the legal fortress that would protect me after she was gone. She could have told me. We'd shared everything else for 30 years, every worry, every joy, every decision. But she hadn't told me about this. My fingers traced the wood grain on the vault steps, the same motion I'd made 10,000 times in my workshop muscle memory, of a carpenter even in darkness. The boards were rough pine from 1947. 73 years of footsteps had worn shallow depressions in each tread. And then I understood. Nora's greatest act of love wasn't leaving me the gold. It was sparing me from knowing. If she'd told me years ago what she suspected about Julian, what would I have done? Confronted him, tried to fix him. Spent years never quite trusting my own son, always watching, always wondering. She'd carried that burden alone, so I wouldn't have to. You sat here alone, I whispered to the darkness, planning all of this so I wouldn't have to carry it. The vault didn't answer, but gratitude shifted in my chest, profound and almost painful. I opened the nearest wooden box and removed a single gold bar, cold and heavy in my hands, about the size of a deck of cards. The surface is stamped with serial number and purity mark 999.9 fine gold. Tomorrow I would walk into that courtroom with Martha and all the evidence Nora had prepared. I would face Julian one last time, not as his father, but as the man he'd tried to rob. I would bring this bar, not as evidence. The legal case didn't need it, but as a reminder of what Julian tried to steal, what Nora protected, and the difference between a son who takes and a wife who gives. I held the gold bar against my chest and closed my eyes. Tomorrow the light, I said to Nora's memory. The vault's darkness seemed to soften around me just slightly, like an answer. The weight of the single gold bar in my jacket pocket felt less like evidence and more like company as I climbed the courthouse steps in December, cold. Martha walked beside me carrying a leather folder, thick with documents. Behind us, Everett followed in quiet solidarity. The Williamson County Courthouse stood against a gray sky, its limestone walls the color of old bone. Inside the courtroom smelled of furniture polish and institutional heating. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Julian sat rigid beside Raymond Blackwell. My son wore a dark suit that made him look older than 30. He didn't look at me. Judge Evelyn Mercer entered at 9 sharp. She was 62, silver-haired, with the kind of measured authority that comes from 3 decades on the bench. Her black robe moved like settled water as she took her seat. "This court is now in session," she said. "Matter of Vance estate capacity petition and inheritance dispute. Ms. Caldwell, you may proceed." Martha stood. "Your Honor, the defense calls Frank Townsend to the stand." Julian's head snapped toward Martha. His face registered something I'd never quite seen before, pure shock layered over dawning dread. He hadn't known Frank would testify. Another of Nora's carefully prepared witnesses emerging exactly when needed. I wondered how many years ago she'd asked Frank to be ready for this day. How many conversations had she conducted in quiet corners, building this fortress one stone at a time, while I measured boards and drove nails. Frank entered from the side door. 73 years old, moving with the careful dignity of a man who'd spent his life managing other people's futures. The bailiff swore him in. Martha approached the witness stand. "Mr. Townsend, please state your occupation and relationship to this case." "I'm a financial advisor, semi-retired. I managed Nora Vance's personal accounts from 1988 until her death in 2018. And did you have knowledge of the 2001 contract between Nora Vance and Vance Lumber regarding asset ownership?" "I did. Nora asked me to review it before she signed." Martha handed him a document. "Is this the contract in question?" Frank examined it carefully. "Yes. This is the original I reviewed in April 2001. Mr. Townsend, in your professional opinion, was Nora Vance of sound mind when she executed this agreement?" "Absolutely. She was one of the sharpest clients I ever had. She understood every clause, every implication." "And what did this contract establish?" Frank's voice carried clearly through the courtroom. The contract explicitly states all disposal rights belong to the holder. That's Arthur Vance. After 2017, when the final payment was made, Nora held absolute personal ownership. The assets became hers entirely, no company rights, no inheritance division possible. Martha nodded. To be clear, did Julian Vance have any legal authority over these assets? None, ever. I glanced at Julian. He stared straight ahead, his face carefully blank. But his jaw muscles worked beneath the skin. Martha entered the contract pages into evidence, the ones I'd found tucked inside the Chet Baker vinyl sleeve 2 years ago. The ones Nora had hidden for me to discover, knowing I'd find them eventually, because she understood how grief works, how a man seeks comfort in the small rituals of remembering. Frank's testimony fell like hammer blows, on nails steady, precise, building something unshakable. Each answer, another board, fitted perfectly into place, creating a structure no one could tear down. When Martha finished, Raymond Blackwell stood for cross-examination. He asked 3 perfunctory questions, his voice flat. He wasn't even trying. The man knew his case had collapsed. Frank stepped down. Judge Mercer turned to the prosecution table, where a county attorney sat with a separate file. Mr. Harrison, I understand you have related evidence to present. The prosecutor stood. Yes, Your Honor. Evidence submitted by Raymond Blackwell himself regarding document falsification. Raymond's face went carefully neutral. The prosecutor laid out the forensic examiner's report, the one Julian had commissioned and buried, the one that proved the lumber mill contract signature had been altered, the one Raymond had submitted to save himself from disbarment, throwing Julian overboard like ballast from a sinking ship. The evidence shows deliberate forgery, the prosecutor said. Mr. Blackwell has provided a sworn affidavit admitting he altered the signature on the 2014 lumber contract to support Mr. Julian Vance's claims of business authority. Judge Mercer's expression darkened. She looked directly at Raymond. Mr. Blackwell, do you have anything to say regarding this evidence? Raymond stood slowly. No, Your Honor. This court is referring Mr. Blackwell's conduct to the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility for review of potential disciplinary violations. The Bar Association will determine appropriate proceedings. Raymond sat down. A judicial referral to the disciplinary board was effectively a career death sentence for a solo practitioner in a small county. His client's inheritance claims were gone. His reputation was next. He stared at the table in front of him with the expression of a man watching his life's work turn to ash. Julian's hand clenched into a fist under the table, the only visible movement. Judge Mercer reviewed the documents before her taking her time. The courtroom held its breath. The evidence is clear and overwhelming, she finally said. Nora Vance was demonstrably competent. The 2001 contract is valid and binding. Julian Vance had no legal authority over the disputed assets. The capacity petition is dismissed with prejudice. All claims against Arthur Vance are denied. Her gavel fell once. The sound echoed like a door closing. This matter is concluded. I sat very still, my fingers touching the gold bar in my jacket pocket. It was warm now from my body heat, solid as truth. Everything Nora had built, every preparation she'd made in silence and solitude had held. The fortress stood. In the courthouse hallway afterward, I breathed deeply for the first time since April 2018. The air tasted like freedom. Everett stood nearby, silent companion, through 2 years of legal warfare. Martha was gathering her files, speaking quietly with Frank. I turned toward the tall window overlooking the courthouse square. Winter light fell through the glass in pale columns. Nora, I whispered to no one visible, you would have enjoyed watching this. Julian's voice was steady when he said, Guilty, Your Honor, to the fraud and extortion charges, steadier than I expected, steadier than mine would have been. 3 months had passed since the December hearing. Now it was March 2020, and I sat in the same courtroom watching my son stand before Judge Mercer to formally enter his plea. The overhead lights made Julian's face look hollow. He'd lost weight. The expensive suit hung differently on his frame. Judge Mercer reviewed the plea agreement. Mr. Vance, you understand that by entering this plea, you acknowledge attempted fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to deprive your father of lawfully owned assets. AZCO Embassies. Yes, Your Honor. The court has reviewed the 2018 inheritance waiver you signed upon your mother's death. That document is confirmed absolute and irreversible. You voluntarily severed all rights to the farm, the business, and any associated assets. You had no legal claim to these assets from the beginning. I felt something shift in my chest, from the beginning. Every attack, every legal maneuver, every threat, all of it groundless from day one. Julian had signed away his inheritance in April 2018, then spent 2 years trying to steal what he'd already given up. Judge Mercer continued, "You are sentenced to 18 months probation, plus financial penalties totaling your remaining liquid assets. You are effectively penniless, Mr. Vance." Julian nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." No apology, no look in my direction, just that single nod of acknowledgement. I watched him walk out of the courtroom, with the same careful posture he'd carried since childhood, shoulders back, head high, pretending the weight wasn't crushing him. I felt tired sadness instead of satisfaction. This was my son. I'd taught him to measure twice and cut once to respect the grain of the wood, to build things that would last. Somewhere along the way, he'd learned different lessons. 2 months later, I sat in Martha's office signing the final civil judgment paperwork. After court costs, legal fees, the restitution order for the fraudulent lumber contracts, and the state's claim on the portion of assets tied to the contested period, Martha said, sliding the document across her desk, $2.2 million to you, clean and clear. I did the math in my head. $3.5 million minus what the courts had determined was owed, not the outcome Nora had imagined maybe, but more than enough to build something real. I stared at the number. $2.2 million awarded as restitution for the auction fraud, the stolen lumber contracts, the forged documents. Money that should have been mine from the start, now officially returned. I signed my name in the space Martha indicated. The pen made a soft scratching sound against the paper. "What will you do with it?" Martha asked. I looked out her window. Spring had turned the courthouse square green. Dogwood trees bloomed white against the old brick buildings. "Build something," I said quietly. "Thank you, Nora." Martha smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in 2 years of legal warfare. "She'd be proud of you, Arthur." That night, I dreamed of 7-year-old Julian standing in my old workshop watching me work a piece of oak. He'd asked, "Why is wood so strong, Dad?" I'd told him about grain and growth rings, about how trees grow stronger in the wind. He'd listened with that intense focus children have when they're really learning something. That was a question the boy forgot to keep asking. I woke up at dawn and went down to the vault. The gold bars sat in their wooden boxes untouched. $3.5 million in bullion that Nora had accumulated over decades. I closed the lid and looked at the cedar beams framing the vault entrance wood I'd installed myself 40 years ago. I had an idea. I'd use the settlement money to build something bigger and better than the old lumberyard shop-high ceilings, with proper ventilation, industrial-grade equipment, a showroom for custom pieces. The sign above the door read, "Vance Handcrafted Carpentry." Just my name, no and son. Everett had become the first manager overseeing 3 younger craftsmen I'd hired. The new workshop rose like a cathedral, to honest work, every nail a prayer, every board a promise kept. The smell of fresh sawdust filled the air sharp and clean. On the final day before the grand opening, I brought the cedar beams from the vault. I'd carefully removed them weeks earlier, preserving the wood that had framed the hiding place for Nora's gold. I built a small corner shelf from that cedar and mounted it on the wall behind my personal workbench. The wood still carried the faint earth smell of the cellar, mixed with the sweet cedar scent. Everett watched me work, standing quietly nearby, the way he'd stood quietly through 2 years of legal hell. When I finished, he asked, "What goes on the cedar shelf, Arthur?" I walked to my truck and retrieved the Chet Baker Sings vinyl record, the one that had held the 2001 contract in its sleeve, the one Nora had left for me to find. I placed it carefully on the cedar shelf. The album cover's faded colors looked right against the honey-colored wood. "A reminder," I said, "of what she hid and what she protected." Everett nodded, understanding without needing explanation. The shelf made from the vault cedar, holding the record that had hidden the contract. Physical memorial to Nora's complete protection. We stood there in the new workshop's golden afternoon light, surrounded by the smell of fresh lumber and linseed oil. Through the windows, I could see the farm stretching toward the Western Hills land that was mine, now secured by a woman who'd loved me enough to fight battles I didn't know needed fighting. Everett moved toward the door, then paused. "Have you ever thought about what Julian's doing now?" My hand's still on the record. I thought about Julian every day, wondered where he was living, how he was surviving with no money and a criminal record. Wondered if he ever thought about the boy who'd asked why wood was strong, or if that version of himself was completely gone. "Every day," I said quietly, "but some distances can't be measured in miles." 6 months after opening the workshop, I finally understood what peace felt like. Hands on fresh-cut autumn light through windows that bore only my name. The distances I'd measured in miles when talking to Everett had become something else now. Time, maybe, or acceptance. Julian was somewhere out there living with his choices. I was here building furniture that would outlast both of us. The workshop hummed with quiet activity. 2 apprentices worked at the far benches while Everett reviewed orders at the desk near the front windows. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil filled the air. Honest smells, the kind that don't lie about what they are. I ran the hand plane across a piece of white oak, watching the thin curls fall away. The wood beneath showed perfect grain, no knots, no flaws. Premium lumber for a custom bookshelf commission. Everett walked over holding a contract. 5th commission signed this morning, custom dining set for the Harrisons. The family from Bell Hollow Road. Same ones. They saw the Miller sideboard at the church fundraiser. Want something similar. I nodded, already seeing the design in my mind. Walnut, probably. Clean lines, traditional joinery. You built something real here, Arthur, Everett said quietly. Something honest. I looked around the workshop. 4 steady clients had become 7, then 12. We weren't getting rich, but we were profitable. More importantly, every piece that left this building carried my actual work, my actual skill. Not Julian's business degree, or Gary's distribution contracts, or anyone else's borrowed authority. Just my hands and wood and time. Plans change, Everett replied. You adapted. Later that afternoon, Everett brought in the local newspaper. He set it on my workbench without comment, folded to the business section. The headline read, Vance Industries officially dissolved. I scanned the article. Julian's company had been liquidated to pay his remaining legal penalties. Gary Sutton had seized the last assets as compensation for his own losses. Raymond Blackwell's law license had been permanently revoked by the state bar. Julian had completed his probation, but his reputation in the business community was destroyed. I folded the paper and set it aside. Julian's company officially dissolved, Everett said. Gary took everything that was left. I heard. You feel anything about it? I considered the question. Did I feel satisfaction? Vindication? Some dark pleasure at my son's complete downfall? No, I felt neutral. Like watching a mathematical equation resolve itself according to its own internal logic. I don't need to do anything, I said. It's already done. What is justice if not simply letting truth run its course? Julian had made choices. Those choices had consequences. I hadn't pursued revenge. I'd simply protected what was mine and let the natural order do the rest. Everett nodded and went back to his desk. That evening, after the apprentices had gone home and Everett had locked the front door, I stood alone in the workshop's golden autumn light. I walked to the corner where the cedar shelf held the Chet Baker vinyl. I took it down for the first time in months. 2 years since I'd found this paper, and interpreted it as a warning, an instruction to flee from whatever danger Nora had foreseen. But lately I'd been thinking about something else she used to do. Nora had used security ink on her pottery studio toolbox, labels special ink, that appeared invisible until exposed to heat. I'd watched her write labels that looked blank until she held them near a lamp. I looked at the paper in my hand. I turned it over. The back appeared blank. My heart started beating faster. I walked to my workbench and held the paper near the desk lamp's incandescent bulb. The heat radiated against my fingers as I waited. Words began to appear on the back, faint at first, then growing clearer. Nora's handwriting in brown ink emerging from nothing, like a ghost materializing. Arthur, I know you won't give up. The $200 for the land is my last gift to return the farm to its rightful owner. Use it to rebuild your career. I always believe in you. Come home, my love. I prepared a place for you. I stood very still, the paper trembling in my hand. Not run away. Not a warning to flee. Come home. The $200 auction. Nora's final arrangement with Harold Pierce. Not just a legal mechanism to secure the farm, though it was that, but also a gift. A pathway home. Money for Arthur to rebuild his carpentry career after Julian's schemes collapsed. Land returned to its rightful owner. A place prepared. She'd known I would discover Julian's betrayal. I know I would feel lost and broken. And she'd prepared this not just legal protection, but a literal foundation. Farmland, auction money, everything I needed to start over. The workshop around me suddenly felt different. Not just a building I'd constructed with settlement funds, but the fulfillment of Nora's plan. the place she'd prepared, the home she'd called me back to. "I'm home, Nora," I whispered to the empty workshop. "I'm finally home." My thumb traced her handwriting one final time. 60 years old, starting over, and for the first time in decades, genuinely grateful. Not for the gold or the money or the legal victories, but for this understanding what she'd done. Understanding that every preparation, every hidden contract, every careful plan had been an act of love, pointing me here. To this workshop that bore only my name. To this craft I'd almost lost. To this piece I'd forgotten existed. I placed the paperback with the Chet Baker vinyl on the cedar shelf. Tomorrow I will start the Harrison dining set. The week after, a custom rocking chair for the pastor's wife. The month after that, who knows. But tonight in the workshop, light that smelled of sawdust and possibility, I stood in the place Nora had prepared and whispered one more time, "I'm home." And for the first time since she died, I believe she could hear me. The cedar shelf would eventually hold more than a vinyl record drawings for the Harrison dining, set a photograph of Everett on his first solo commission, receipts from clients who trusted my craft. Each edition would layer meaning onto the cedar, the way growth rings, layer meaning onto living wood, quietly, patiently, without announcement. Nora had spent decades constructing invisible architecture so that when everything collapsed, something solid remained beneath. Now the architecture was mine to extend not through contracts hidden in albums or vaults sealed beneath barn floors, but through chairs built for strangers' tables meant to outlast the hands that shaped them, and mornings where the first sound was always a plane across honest grain. And to you listening to my story, remember this family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound, but truth has a way of rising to the surface. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the signs earlier. I was so focused on building the business that I missed what was happening with Julian. I trusted blindly when I should have asked harder questions. Don't make my mistake. Love your family, yes, but keep your eyes open. Not everyone who shares your blood shares your values. This family story taught me that protection sometimes looks like secrets, and love sometimes means preparing for battles you hope never come. Nora knew something I didn't want to see. She carried that burden alone because she loved me. I believe God put me through this family betrayal, not to break me, but to rebuild me stronger. The gold wasn't the inheritance, the real gift was understanding that someone loved me enough to fight for my future, even after they were gone. That's the lesson I want you to take from this family story. If this family story resonated with you, please leave a comment below. Have you ever experienced family betrayal? Your stories matter. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Revenge Dad. I read every comment and your support keeps this channel going. Thank you for staying until the very end. As a reminder, certain details have been adapted for storytelling purposes, but the heart of the message remains true. God bless you.